for coming to our Understanding Standards and Depth of Knowledge for Grades K through 2 webinar. Just a couple of webinar logistics here. Thank you so much to the New Hampshire Department of Education. They are sponsoring this webinar series, so we're able to bring this to you at no cost. And we have been working in a relationship with them for quite a while for this data coaching contract. So we appreciate all the help and support that we get from the NHED. You are muted, so just know that we cannot hear you. Also, if you could please ask your questions in the Q&A. I think the chat might be disabled, but it's also something it shows up behind our screens, so we can't actually see what's going on as much in the chat. So if you put it in the Q&A, I have Annie Wallace here. She's going to be feeding me some of the questions. I also saw somebody might have raised their hand. In a webinar format, it's really hard for us to unmute you when you're raising your hand with this large of a group. But if you have specific questions that you feel like you can't type in, we'll stay on at the end and we can try to do the raise the hand thing and all of that. But big questions we get are, is there a PD certificate? Where's the video and the PowerPoint and any documents that we're referring to? Those will come via email for you tomorrow. It is going to be sent out by our marketing person, Elizabeth Dion. She will also be sending you not only the information for the Google Drive, but Annie will be creating a course in Canvas so that you can access information also from there. And then at the end, there will be a brief survey that will pop up as I log off the webinar. We really take a peek at your feedback and we want to know what you think. So be sure to share your thoughts. That would be super helpful for us. If for some reason you have to log off before I end this, it will also be a link in the email tomorrow. So for folks that are going to be on this webinar today, I am the presenter for part of this. I'm Heather Jenkins. We also have Annie Wallace from the NHED.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming.
And Kate McCaffrey is also going to be joining us at some point. She might be on a little bit later, but she's our ELA person. So she will be here hopefully for part of this, and we'll just get started. So here's our agenda that we're going to be following today. The first thing we wanted to do was make sure that everybody's on the same page for knowing your standards and understanding how to read them. Then we'll go into understanding depth of knowledge, or DOK, and then a little bit of information about how you can transfer all of this to the classroom. And then, like I said a little bit ago, we will have a wrap up and a question and answer session if you have any additional questions. So really, just to make sure, I know we have a lot of educators on here, you know what the standards are, but these are really not just for us, but for any line of work. Their expectations that inform and shapes our work. So for us, the academic standards are those expectations for what students will learn, not just what we're teaching, but what students will learn. So we are guided by the Common Core, and those are our state standards. I know that for some folks, you have individual district standards, but any of the district standards that I have seen for districts in New Hampshire are really based also on the Common Core, and there might be some additional standards that were added to what was in the Common Core as well. So why do we use them? It really provides a framework to help us identify our teaching and learning priorities. I know a lot of us use programs that are standards aligned, and there aren't any programs out there that aren't at least touting to be standards aligned. But what I would say is that if you are using any program and you're looking at that program and the standards that it's covering, really take a peek and always look at your standards and make sure that it's also covering it in the way that it needs to for that depth of knowledge that we'll be getting into in just a little bit. They help guide the design of curriculum and assessments, right? A lot of us use programs for these as well, but we always want to make sure that we are, again, looking back at those standards to ensure that we're really covering them to the best of our abilities. And they also help us ensure that all students have access to the same learning and expectations, right? If I'm teaching second grade, I want my second grade students to have the same access to learning as students in every other second grade. And the best way to do that is to really make sure that we are looking at the same standards and interpreting them in the same way. So again, for ELA and math, we are looking specifically at Common Core. And for science, we're looking at the next generation science standards. So I want to make sure that everybody understands how to read the standards. So really the way that they're broken up is by domain, or what we call reporting categories. So right here for ELA, we're looking at reading standards for literature, reading standards for informational text. There's also writing, there's speaking and listening, but those are your standard domains. So those are your big categories there for ELA. For math, it's the same thing. We have domains or reporting categories. These are two of the math domains: operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations base 10. There's measurement data and geometry. So those are your big categories for math. For reporting categories or domains for science, you're looking at physical science, life science, and earth science. As we break down the standards even further, we have our right here reporting category or domain is reading standards for literature. And then within that, we have what are called clusters of standards. So the clusters are here shown are key ideas and details, craft and structure. There's also integration of knowledge and ideas, and so on and so forth. Underneath each cluster are individual standards that are listed. So a lot of times you'll hear people refer to clusters, and what that means is we're looking at one of these areas here and then maybe one or more standards underneath that are part of a cluster. For math, it's the same thing. We're looking at math, operations, and algebraic thinking. Right here is our domain or reporting category. We have a couple of clusters that are shown here, and underneath that, there are specific standards. For science, we have clusters here. They're called disciplinary core ideas, or sometimes they're topic arrangements. And so these are the two for life science that we have here. And then underneath that, there's a lot of criteria that goes into each one of those, but they don't necessarily have individual standards. It's really a whole sort of topic area or disciplinary core idea. For ELA, just so that you can understand how the standards are sort of structured, we have, first and foremost, we have this sort of staircase. We need to provide students with tools and foundational skills to support their learning. Then we need to make sure to model and demonstrate how to make those strong connections, or summarizing, drawing inferences, thinking critically, and it's specifically in relation to text. And then that next step is it's supporting various text structures, like we're talking fiction, nonfiction. We look at author's craft and all those sort of critical thinking skills in literacy. And then the next step to that are those higher thinking skills where students build that foundation. And it makes, when we say knowledge across fields, it's vocabulary, it's background and everything. It's social studies. It's not necessarily just in your ELA, but we're really able to make sure that they're able to read and understand content in all areas. There's this sort of understanding and this shift in thinking for the ELA standards. And one of them is regular practice with a variety of texts. This was one of the shifts when the Common Core was coming into play. And also it's making sure that students are able to get evidence and look at the text to be able to figure out the evidence of what they're reading and what they understand within that text when it comes to writing specific things, when it comes to reading, and then also building knowledge with rich content knowledge. So we're talking about being able to understand different vocabulary and different with your science and social studies and all of those particular areas as well. So these here are the reading anchor standards for the college and career ready. So this is the end game for the Common Core. The key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and range of reading and level of text complexity are themes in pretty much every grade level. But these are what they need to have at the very end, is what's on this page. So if we look at this for your particular grade level, so we look at it for K1 and 2, is we really start with those foundational skills. So within the foundational skills, we start with those print concepts. Those are standards for ELA in kindergarten and first grade, and you can kind of see what they are here. The next thing we have is that phonological awareness. And again, we're looking at phonological awareness for kindergarten and first grade students. Where this starts to build then after that with the foundational skills are those phonics and word recognition. You can see that those are all kindergarten, first and second grade skills. And it basically starts with these skills all build on one another. So what the students need to know in kindergarten then needs to be they need to know that before they get to first grade, and first grade skills build on those kindergarten. And then that's obviously the second grade on the first grade. And so they build all the way up to those career readiness skills that are once a student leaves high school. Same thing with fluency. We're building those right up from kindergarten and up to second grade. Whenever you're looking at the standards, a lot of people are pretty well versed in what their grade level standards are, but we really encourage you to understand what the skills that are before you and after you. So if you're a first grade teacher, you're looking at kindergarten and second grade. For kindergarten, obviously you're the sort of jumping point. So you're looking mostly at your standards, but it's also good to look at those first grade standards to know where they need to be in the year that's coming after them. And so we always, rule of thumb, you look at your surrounding grade levels so you can really get an understanding of where students are coming from and where they need to go. It's also, unfortunately, we need to know a lot of where they were coming from as they're coming into our classrooms now, because we know that students are having a bit of challenge with really securing those skills in the lower, grade levels before us, with sort of what's been going on in education in the world and COVID and all of that. I think that we're getting there, but it is always good to know where the students need to be before they come to you. With reading, there's also, these are for anchor standards for reading literature. There are also anchor standards for reading informational text. This is just an example here, really just showing you again that those areas, the key ideas and details, those clusters, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and range of reading and text complexity start all the way in kindergarten, and they're going to go right up through high school. There's also these college and career readiness standards for writing. Again, these here are the ones that students need to have by the end of their high school years. But really, the anchor standards for us in the lower grades have to do with narrative writing, informational writing, and opinion or argumentative writing. These standards are right in the Common Core as well. It's a little bit harder to see exactly where the narrative writing, the opinion writing, and the argumentative writing or informative writing are, but they tend to be right up in this first text types and purposes. They're embedded in these first three standards here. And then a lot of the information about, how much they're writing and how much sort of support they're getting in writing becomes some of the standards that are down here at the bottom. This is just a progression to show you we have a single standard here. This is one of the anchor standards. And what this does is it's the key ideas and details, that first standard, and it basically shows you what that means in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. You can see the grade level right here on the side, all the way up through high school. So you can kind of see how that one standard really transforms all the way up through high school, but it also shows you what your sort of part of that is as a grade level teacher and what you're responsible for at your grade level.
Okay, the mathematics standards are pretty similar in a lot of their progression. They are internationally benchmarked. They provide guidance and rigor and building the conceptual understanding, procedural skills, and fluency, and application is the end goal. Each grade level has key concepts on them, and the progressions develop, or sometimes they're called learning trajectories, and they provide coherence linking the topics and the thinking across the grade levels. And the key concepts tend to occur over a 3-year period in mathematics. So 1 year they're introduced, the next year they're worked on and really developed, and then the third year they're being secured. So in the key concepts, so in grades K-2, concept, skills, and problems, addition and subtraction are your main key concepts, that additive reasoning. In grades 3 to 5, we're working on multiplicative reasoning with multiplication and division of whole numbers, and we start introducing and working with fractions. 6th grade, ratios and proportional relationships and early algebraic expressions and equations are the focus area. And then they're developed more fully in grade 7 with ratios and proportional relationships and the arithmetic of rational numbers. And then in 8th grade, we're really starting to set them up to have the groundwork to be successful in an Algebra 1 course in high school. So Achieve the Core has really good documents, and they take the algebraic progression that's really seen strongly throughout the K-8, leading them up so that you are very successful in Algebra 1 in high school. So they have the supporting work. So these are the standards that really support algebraic reasoning and thinking. Then they have ones where they're appropriate and giving support to those. And then they have the other ones, which, while not tying directly into the algebraic progression, they are still important standards. And those include many of your measurement and data and geometry standards. And this diagram gives you that algebraic progression that you can see from K-8.
Okay. When we're talking about the next generation science standards, I realize especially in the lower grades, there is, for next generation, they give you what specific topics are for each grade level. So you can see here what the specific topics are for kindergarten, for life science, earth and space science, and physical science, first grade and second grade. We also know that there, in a lot of schools, that it's variable, that kindergarten might do this, life science unit, and maybe they do patterns and cycles, where first grade might do weather and climate. So it's usually in a grade span that these are the topics that are supposed to be covered through next generation. This particular website, this mynsta.org website, is really helpful. I feel like a lot of us know about the next generation, the NGSS site, but this particular website is nice because it breaks it down. I can just click right on this. So if I click here and it opens this website for me, I can see for elementary, I've got this here. If I wanted to see what weather and climate was, I would click right on it. and it gives me all of my performance expectations. It gives me my science and engineering practices, those disciplinary core ideas that I was talking about, and any of the cross-cutting concepts. I just think it's really helpful to be able to see that. And then you can even on this, you're able to click on this and it brings you into that area. So I just found this particular site pretty easy to navigate. Melissa White from the DOE shared it with us, and I've tried to steer folks in the direction of it quite a bit. So there's that there. We also have here, just in general, you're going to get this Google slide presentation. So we just put in all of the links to any of the sites that we thought might be helpful for you to really take a look at and understand your standards. One of the big things that we're really trying to have folks understand is being able to break those standards apart and make sure that your interpretation of what a standard is the intention of that standard. And so any information that we can provide or anything that you need related to the standards, make sure to let us know. But this is a lot of information about where you can find additional information for that. Just going to pause there and just make sure, see if there's any questions in general about standards. We're going to start moving into our depth of knowledge section. So I don't want to move on until we make sure we're all set there. Okay, I think we'll move right on to this understanding depth of knowledge then. And we'll start talking about what the DOK and what that means.
So depth of knowledge levels really are not about greater difficulty and things just getting harder. It's about the cognitive rigor which people apply to problems. So we're going to be thinking about flexible thinking, seeing multiple possibilities or approaches and possible perspectives, and uncovering multiple perspectives or approaches to a problem or to a reading passage, which means to understand concepts deeply and apply them broadly. And so when we think of tasks that we learn as a beginner, whether it's like skiing, decoding words, playing a musical instrument, starting to learn to use math formulas, they may seem difficult to do at first, but the more we practice them, the more we ingrain them and take them in, and they become easier, but the DOK level doesn't change on them. So the more complex task, what we would consider a DOK 3 or 4, requires students to apply those memorized skills and concepts to new and more complex tasks. So taking what we learned and applying and solving more complex problems. So it's similar to athletic teams, that you learn and practice skills like dribbling, shooting, passing, and musical instruments. You may learn to play scales. And then you start putting those skills into games or playing a piece of music. So you're taking what you learned are the basics and now applying them to something more complex. So depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy. In reality, tasks at lower DOK levels prepare students for solving and exploring the more complex, non-routine types of problems that require reasoning, proof, or analyzing complex texts and issues. The DOK is a tool that can help strategically scaffold learning so students can move from basic to deeper understandings. So it's not the number of steps that makes something more complex or demanding of cognitive rigor. It's the non-routine nature of how one step might lead to decisions made about the other steps in the process that deepens the complexity of the tasks and learning. So in math, we can see this through a set of problems. So we have B, which would be our DOK level 1. I know that 4 plus 1 is the same as, is it the same as 5 minus 2? So is that number sentence true or false? I see all the numbers, I can I can simplify it and say, no, that is false. 4 plus 1 is not the same as 5 minus 2. Then I get up to C, which would be my DOK2, which is using the digits 1 to 9 at most one time each, fill in the boxes to create 2 true number sentences. And then it gets even a little bit more complex when I go to A. So I'm taking those same digits, but now I need to find the number sentence with the greatest possible value to it. And Robert Kaplinski, and the link is right there once you get the slides, has a wonderful wealth of matrices all the way from elementary through high school that helps to show what each DOK level looks like within a certain standard. So you can see how you start with the routine. This is what I need to know as my basic skills, and building to the more complex through DOK3. A DOK4 would be more of a long-term application problem or a performance task.
Right. When it comes to ELA, the way that depth of knowledge works here is the things that students are doing that are a DOK1 are sort of that recall or reproduction, like that who, what, when, where, why, and how. We can't stop at that. We need to move on after that into a DOK2, which is understanding a skill or concept and applying it. So basically, they might need to interpret something, classify something, display or compare, contrast some type of information. Again, that who, what, when, where, why, and how needs to be understood to be able to do that DOK2. Same thing with DOK3, we're now moving up into that strategic thinking. They're asked to explain, they're asked to connect ideas or support their understanding with text. They need to maybe take a look at how to really think abstractly about a theme or an inference across a passage. And again, making sure that they are using that application of prior knowledge to be able to do that. For DOK4, it's really moving on from that strategic thinking to extended thinking. And so the demands on students have them really integrating that higher order thinking processes. So critical thinking, creative, productive thinking, reflection. So it's really kind of taking all of that and extending their thinking outside of sort of that recall and reproduction or that strategic thinking or applying those skills and concepts. This is a pretty popular wheel here, and this is really the DOK levels, and they're kind of a question stem. These are the factors. So if we look at here, the DOK level 1, these are some of the words that we might use at a DOK1 as educators. And then here, when we're asking them to infer or construct, that's a DOK2. Here's some information about DOK3 with that strategic thinking. So we're citing evidence and all of that. And then level 4 is that applying or connecting or designing something. These are also a couple of different resources that you might be able to use that have to do with depth of knowledge and question stems for ELA.
Dr. Karen Hess, who lives right next door in Vermont, has created some matrices that combine Bloom and Webb together. So the Hess cognitive matrices provide a way to see what cognitive demand might look like in the classroom and help give us descriptors for each of the content areas to help categorize and plan for various levels of abstraction. So analyzing the mental processes required of assessment questions and learning tasks. So here you'll have the links. She's done them very nicely for a variety of content areas, because we know that even though we have skills that transcend all the content areas, their content areas also have very specific skills within them. And then again, we've given you some sites that you can go to and explore.
Okay. All right. So that is really just an understanding and overview of what depth of knowledge might look for ELA and for math. So we'll move on here to transferring that knowledge to the classroom. So how do we take everything that we know here, and what are some ways that we can then transform this into what we do in our classroom? So this is John Hattie. He's probably a familiar name for most of us. I'm just going to read it. When teaching and learning are visible, there is a greater likelihood of students reaching higher levels of achievement. So he's at the forefront of making sure and understanding the best ways that student learning is taking place. So one of the things that he's talking about is this visible learning. And really, we've been doing a lot of these learning targets. We have I can statements. It's not just putting the I can statement up on the board. That's one step, right? So that students can kind of understand, but it's really taking a look at that and the objective and having students truly understand what they need to do to be able to show their understanding of that objective, right? So if we just put it up there and we say, I can add and subtract with and without regrouping, that's not enough. A student needs to understand really, what does that mean for me? Today, that's what we're going to be practicing, but how can I show that? What is it that I need to do? And so really looking at that and making sure that the learning is understood and what students need to do for that is really helpful and a game changer for them. For specific,
I can do that if you want,
Oh,
Heather.
Yeah.
I am here. I'm hopping off a meeting and into this wonderful meeting. And it's so nice to see everybody today. I am the ELA consultant. And I just love the Story Glove. So you see a picture over here of the Story Glove from Project Read, which has been adapted in many different ways. And it's really to get kids to really think about their story. Can they know who the characters are? Where is the story taking place? What was the problem in the story? And then what were like the steps, especially using those transition words? First, at the beginning, next, meanwhile, really having students do this orally and then transforming it into writing. How did the person solve the problem? Can you tell me using your transition words? And then what was the solution? Really understanding the ability to retell a story, to understand the lesson in the story or the moral of the story, especially if it's a fable, or why are we reading this story? So really thinking on how each one of these kind of scaffold, I know I wasn't here to do some of my slides, but they kind of scaffold from the beginning steps of our standards, and they keep developing as they move up each standard. But really being able to do this in second grade, first grade, and kindergarten is so imperative for young learners. So what does this look like? It sometimes looks like being able to ask questions. And something I have done in my classroom is really have the students begin to ask each other questions. And that starts out kind of basic with those right there questions, but then trying to encourage them to ask questions that are a little bit harder, like what is the character feeling? And really by modeling this. So when it transforms or transfers into the classroom, the students are beginning to take ownership. So if you're doing reading group, you can have them ask each other questions, or who can come up with the best question, who can model a retell, highlighting great word choices. I used to use sprinkle words. So if they use a great word that they are using to describe their character's feelings or character traits, we call them sprinkle words. So just showing how they can retell, then begin to write retell, and really understand the characters, the setting, with their using their expressions to explain that. You can do the next slide. So this is a checklist that I created when I was a elementary teacher, and you can go down and see each student can get a checklist. You can check off when they've demonstrated it, when they've showed these skills, and then you can write evidence as you go forward with parent conferences or for your own kind of records. This is math.
So we can use standards to write the learning targets. So for example, using the second grade numbers in base 10, standards 1, 3, and 4, I can just take what's in those standards and then reword them to create the I can statement or I am learning about. So find a place value of a digit and a 3-digit whole number. Write whole numbers to 1,000s in words in standard form and expanded form. Read whole numbers to 1,000 in words in standard form and expanded form, and then use the comparative symbols. So supporting student ownership is really important, and that's where I can statements, turning them sometimes into I know I am successful when. Just sometimes that switch in the wording lets students see that this is a learning process, and they can say, okay, I can do this now, and I'm working on this. I can do this now, so the next thing I'm going to work on is this. Also taking the I can statements and turning them into success criteria that you can put in the front of your classroom or on the work, if you had a paper sheet of something or in their Google Classroom, that they can see what they're learning on and what they know they need to be working on, and they can check off when they're successful with it. The model competencies in mathematics this was the early draft of them. They look a little differently, but they're now up on the department's website under model competencies. But we have the standards, and we can take them and turn them into the competencies, and then the standards are broken into skills. So you can use those as a checklist in the same way you do in your ELA classes, and you can use as evidence saying, the child can do this, and this is the evidence I have for it, but this is what we're working on now. So John Hattie is one of the thing is supporting student ownership of their work. So triangulating the data, we can create an accurate picture of each student and their learning, while at the same time shifting their own focus from grades as a product to evidence of learning. So evaluating what you value, help students see where they're at and where they're going. And I found one of the nicest things I had learned was, instead of using the word but, use the word and. So you did really well on X, Y, and Z, and rather than saying but now you need to work on this, just changing it to the word you did really well on X, Y, and Z, and now we're going to be working on that. So that first part of what they did well on doesn't drop into saying, but now you have to do this. It's like, okay, I learned this, now I can go do this. So tools to help in planning, scope and sequencing, curriculum maps, assessment mapping, and universal design for learning are all powerful tools in helping us map out our curriculums, helping planning for our children, seeing where they're at and what they know and where we need to go next. So scope and sequencing, a lot of times you'll already have these in your textbooks or programs that you use. So the scope refers to the breadth and depth of the content and the skills to be covered. And the sequence is the perceived order that learners learn them in, or that you're going to present them to the students in. Scope and sequence in a curriculum map are nearly interchangeable. The curriculum map usually has a little more information in it, and we'll include, this is what you're going to use for activities and assessments. So it gives the details to the topics that may be in the scope and sequence. Assessment mapping is something that I always kind of did mentally, but I never did a formal assessment mapping. And when I learned about it, it really makes a big difference in how you can plan out so that students aren't all of a sudden having a unit test at the same time, your interim testing or the spring state testing is. So it allows you to see when and how the students are being assessed and what they're being assessed on. So you get that progression of how are we checking in on their learning, as well as making sure we're not overburdening with them with too many assessments at the same time. So assessment mapping these are just some examples of it where I can see in using color coding what assessments are where. And then the other one is allowing me to see the types of assessments that I have and how they play, because not all assessments give us the same amount of learning or same purpose. So I have my classroom assessments, which that's where I'm really getting at what is each student learning. And then I have the school or district assessments that are the overall checking. Those are more summative of checking. And then I have the state testing, which is usually assessing more of how are we doing in our teaching and what we're offering to the students. So action planning and using assessments, we want to ensure the assessments are appropriate for the specific purpose that we have them for. We want to design or select assessments that align with that purpose. And then we want to interpret and use the data from the assessments to address student needs, and then planning forward. And then PLCs are wonderful tools, strategies, groups that can support collaboration to develop assessments, analyze data, and plan next steps and the use of evidence. So use effective classroom assessment strategies to inform your teaching and learning practices. We want to make sure we're using the right evidence for the right purpose. I'm not necessarily going to use the New Hampshire SAS testing to drill down what a student is knowing day to day, unit to unit. It gives me the SAS gives me an overall big picture, but it doesn't give me the drill downs that I need to support each individual student. So besides ensuring the right evidence for the right purpose, we want to improve skills in critiquing and revising our existing assessments, if any. They help us to have deeper knowledge of a current student and their understandings, and they can help us make better informed instructional decisions, as well as making efficient and effective use of the information from our district and state level assessments to be critical of our own teaching and the own materials that we're using in supporting our student learning.
All right, just to kind of piggyback off of that too with the assessment, and we're talking about what our specific goals are for those assessments. One thing that you want to just make sure that you're doing as well is really taking a look at your current assessments and making sure that they are truly aligned to the standards and that they're assessing what you would like them to assess. So before I moved on to this, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of brought that back to the standards, because that is the goal of what we want our students to learn. So just make sure you're always keeping that in mind as well. One of the ways that we can also transfer into the classroom what we know about standards and what we know about student understanding is this universal design for learning. It's called UDL. It is not new, but I think that it is newer to some of the educators here in New Hampshire. And really what this does is it looks at the brain and how the brain understands concepts. And it really starts looking at trying to figure out how we can continue to have complexity in our learning and have students at all different levels being able to access that particular learning, even though they may have different learning styles or different rates at which they learn. So CAST is one of the major organizations that is has a lot of information about this. And so what this does is it creates a way for you to be able to scaffold support so that you can meet the needs of all students. It's a practice. It's kind of a framework that you do for every single lesson that you would do in your classroom, and it allows you to differentiate. And it's that same theory of that backwards design in teaching. So the three areas that they look at are student engagement, they look at representation, and they look at action and expression. And then within that, they have a lot of different sort of helpful ways for you to be thinking about each one of these in your classroom. One of the main things that I've taken out of some of the learning that I've done for UDL is that really it's taking away a lot of the barriers of what you might have in your classroom that is preventing students from understanding certain skills. So an example would be that you might have had a student at some point that needed to use manipulatives for math in a certain way that maybe not all other kids needed to. So over time you found, okay, this student really, this type of manipulative, maybe it's a pipe cleaner with little beads on it that allows them to count. That particular thing that you're doing for that student, you realize is universal for all students and might help all students in your classroom. So that becomes common practice inside your classroom. And so these are things that, you know, over time, it's not, I don't know if universal design for learning, you can't just say we're doing it all of a sudden and every single lesson has to do with it, but it is something that over time, and you start to plan different lessons and you're able to use them for a year, from year to year. And basically it is just a way to design your lessons to take away those barriers. An example that they use is also like when we first started having the American with Disabilities Act, they required every governmental building to have some sort of access for handicapped folks and ramps and all of that. And now pretty much every building you go into has access either by elevator or ramp or whatever to be able to get into a building. It's just been integrated into things that we do on a regular basis. It's sort of like that for the classroom. So these are just some general information that you can have about universal design for learning. Another area, another sort of tool that we have that can be helpful for you is something called the Lexile Quantile Hub. It is sponsored, the New Hampshire Department of Education has if you're an educator in New Hampshire, you get a free account. You just sign up, you say you're from New Hampshire, you don't have to pay for it. But it allows you to start looking at some of these Lexile and Quantile areas where you can really start to get a little bit more information about some of the supports for your teaching within this particular hub. So if I just click here, these are the Lexile tools that you can have. And then here are the Quantile tools. I know specifically this teacher assistant for the Quantile tools is really helpful. You can put in a specific standard and it gives you the skills that students need to have, and it gives you some of those teaching sort of recommendations. There's little videos in that you can take a peek at as well. If you click here, I'll just kind of show it to you really quickly. I know we don't have a ton of time, but this is the Lexile Quantile Hub. As soon as you start getting into it, it will want you to either register or sign in, but there's word lists, there's this growth planner. You can take a look at finding a book at a particular level here. for the Lexile tools, and then the Quantile tools, same type of thing. This is the biggest one I see, is that teacher assistant. I can put in a specific standard and it will give me the prerequisite skills and any of the skills that I can be working on, and some information about what I can do to be able to make sure that students are meeting those particular skills. All right. Any questions at this point? So sort of our Q&A section of our webinar. So I'll kind of keep going here. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A and we can try to answer them for you, just so that you can know what's coming up. We have these same webinars if you have colleagues in grades 3 through 5 or 6 through 8 or 9 through 12. We're doing a very similar webinar for each one of those with some examples at their particular grade levels. And then again, when we come off, a survey will come up. So if there's anything else you might need, and then here's our general information. You can reach out to any of us. Annie is for the New Hampshire DOE. She is the math person. Kate is the ELA person, and I am sort of your general. I'm math, I'm ELA, whatever you need. But if you're looking for specific supports on math and ELA, Annie and Kate are your people.
There is one question, and I'm trying to get the link. So I don't know if everybody can see this. There is on the Department of Education website. So if you just typed in metametrics.
I'm just going to go right here.
Right.
And I'll try. The chat is a funny thing. It goes behind. I don't know if I can put it in there. Let me see if I can get it in and send it to everybody.
Yeah.
There it is.
Thank you. I didn't have access to the
it's
chat.
Behind for some reason. I'm not really sure what is happening.
But it is on the website and you can get to it from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you get to the hub, you just click on register and just follow the directions, and please use your school or district email address.
Yeah, so it's just register here.
Yeah.
And you're an educator, and then you choose New Hampshire. I'm already in, so if I sign in, it looks the same, but now I get to get into all of the areas here.
Then there's another question on not sure how much input a teacher has when the curriculums are already in the textbooks. There are things you can do in modifying it. It depends on how strict your district is and you have to follow exactly. But that's something, if you want to contact me, I can work with you so we can develop things like an opening problem and number talks and things that you can build in and include along with what your district is requiring you to do.
All right. It does not seem like there's any other questions here. Definitely reach out to us. You will get an email that is going to be kicked off tomorrow with the all the materials from this in your certificate. So we appreciate you coming today, and hopefully we will see you all again another time.